My name is Bianca Whitfield, and I'm 31 years old. The process server found me on a Thursday morning in April, exactly 14 months after the accident that changed everything, while I was kneeling in the driveway helping my daughter, Josephine, buckle her shoe. He handed me a thick manila envelope, asked me to confirm my name for the record, and left before I'd even finished reading the caption on the first page: a custody and property petition, filed by my husband, Desmond Whitfield, the same man who had packed 2 suitcases and walked out of our house 11 months earlier without so much as a goodbye to his 6-week-old daughter. I stood there in the driveway holding that envelope, my cane leaning against the porch railing where I'd left it minutes earlier, and read the words "unfit to provide adequate care" 3 times before they fully registered. Desmond wasn't just asking for visitation. He was asking a judge to grant him primary custody of Josephine and full possession of the house I had rebuilt my entire life inside of, one painful physical therapy session at a time, completely alone. Tell me in the comments what you'd have done standing in that driveway, because Bianca's answer to that envelope took 11 months to build and about 30 seconds to deliver. 14 months earlier, I was 7 months pregnant, driving home from a prenatal checkup on a rain-slicked stretch of Route 19, when a delivery truck ran a red light and struck the driver's side of my sedan going nearly 40 miles an hour. I remember the sound more than the impact itself, a sound like the whole world folding in half, and then waking up in an ambulance with a paramedic telling me to stay still, that they were taking every precaution because of the baby. The baby, remarkably, was untouched. I was not. The collision fractured my L1 vertebra and caused significant nerve compression in my lower spine, and the trauma surgeon at St. Aldrich Medical Center told my husband, Desmond, in the hallway outside my room, before he told me directly, that I would likely need extensive rehabilitation and that walking unassisted again was possible, but far from guaranteed. Josephine was born 6 weeks later by scheduled cesarean, healthy and loud, while I lay in a hospital bed still recovering from spinal surgery, unable to hold her for the first several hours because my own hands were shaking too badly from the medication and the fear. Desmond visited the hospital every day that first week, quiet and pale, telling me things would be fine, that we'd figure it out together. I believed him, in the way you believe things when you have no other option but to. We brought Josephine home to a house I could no longer navigate without a walker, every doorway suddenly too narrow, every staircase suddenly a small mountain. I needed help with almost everything in those first weeks. Bathing, dressing, even shifting positions in bed, without triggering the nerve pain that radiated down my left leg like a live wire. 6 weeks after Josephine was born, I woke from a nap to find 2 suitcases already packed by our closet and Desmond sitting on the edge of the bed, telling me, in a voice so calm it didn't seem to belong to the moment, that he wasn't built for this, that he needed space to think, and that he'd be staying with his brother in Ocala for a while. He kissed Josephine's forehead once. He didn't kiss mine. By the time I'd maneuvered myself to the front window using my walker, his car was already at the end of the street, and it would be 11 months before I saw him again. My physical therapy started 3 weeks after Desmond left, twice a week at a rehabilitation clinic in Brandon with a therapist named Corinne Vasquez, who was blunt with me from our first session. Recovery from an L1 fracture with nerve involvement typically follows a slow, nonlinear timeline, often 18 months to 2 years. Before patients regain confident, unassisted mobility, and some patients never fully return to their prior gait. She measured my progress in small, specific milestones: the first day I stood without the parallel bars for support, the first day I climbed 4 stairs without gripping the railing, the first day I carried Josephine's diaper bag while walking instead of pushing it in front of me on the walker's tray. By month 4, I graduated from the walker to a forearm crutch. By month 9, to a single cane. Every one of those transitions I documented in a small spiral notebook. Corinne encouraged me to keep dates and details scrawled in the margins between diaper changes and midnight feedings, because she told me that patients who tracked their own recovery tended to stay more motivated through the plateaus. I didn't know then that notebook would end up meaning something far beyond motivation. If you've ever had to rebuild something one small, humiliating milestone at a time, drop a like for Bianca right now, because the version of her standing unassisted at month 9 had no idea what was still coming for her. I learned to run a household from a wheelchair, then a walker, then a cane, in that order, out of sheer necessity. My mother drove in from 2 counties over 3 times a week during the worst of it, and a neighbor, an older widow named Faye Hutton, started sitting with Josephine during my therapy appointments after noticing me struggling to manage a car seat and a walker at the same time in our driveway one afternoon. I picked up freelance bookkeeping work I could do from my kitchen table once my hands steadied enough to type for long stretches, slowly rebuilding a small client base that, by month 10, covered our mortgage on its own. I never filed for divorce during those 11 months, partly because I didn't have the bandwidth to pursue it while relearning how to stand, and partly because some small, stubborn part of me kept expecting Desmond to come back and explain himself. He sent exactly 4 text messages in 11 months, each one shorter than the last, the final one simply asking whether Josephine had started walking yet. I answered honestly. She'd taken her first steps 2 weeks earlier, in our living room, while I cheered her on from a chair because I still couldn't safely chase after her myself. The petition Desmond's attorney filed painted a household I didn't recognize. It claimed I had a documented history of physical incapacity rendering consistent, independent childcare unreliable, citing my injury and recovery timeline as though 11 months of solo caregiving were evidence against me rather than proof of exactly the opposite. It claimed Desmond had been forced to relocate temporarily for his own well-being during a period of marital strain, without once mentioning that the strain in question was a spinal fracture and a newborn he'd left behind. It asked the court to grant him primary physical custody of Josephine and sole possession of the family home, on the grounds that he was better positioned to provide a stable environment. I read it twice, sitting at my kitchen table with Josephine napping upstairs, and felt something shift from grief into something colder and more useful. Whatever Desmond's attorney thought they knew about the past 11 months, they had built their entire case on an assumption that a woman who had needed a walker to reach her own kitchen would have nothing to show for the year that followed. I called Corinne first, my physical therapist, and asked whether she'd be willing to provide a written summary of my recovery progress for a legal matter. She said yes immediately, and within a week I had a formal letter documenting every milestone for my file. The exact date I'd transitioned off the walker, the date I'd been cleared for unassisted stairs, the date my gait had been assessed as functionally independent for standard daily activities, each one cross-referenced against my own spiral notebook, which suddenly felt less like a motivational tool and more like a time-stamped record no attorney could argue with. I gathered my bookkeeping client invoices showing 11 consecutive months of income. I gathered Josephine's pediatric records showing every well-child visit attended solely by me, every vaccination scheduled and kept. I found Faye Hutton willing to write a short statement about the childcare support she provided and, more importantly, about how rarely Desmond had called or visited during that time. My attorney, a family law specialist named Priscilla Odom, told me plainly during our first meeting that Florida custody law centers on the best interest of the child standard, weighing factors like each parent's demonstrated involvement, stability, and caregiving history, not which parent could better afford a lawyer to argue otherwise. Desmond's attorney opened by emphasizing my injury, walking the judge through medical terminology about spinal trauma as though reciting a diagnosis were the same as proving incapacity. Desmond himself testified that he'd left temporarily to process the trauma of the accident, that he'd stayed in regular contact, and that he'd only recently felt stable enough to resume an active parenting role. Under cross-examination from Priscilla, he couldn't recall Corinne's name, couldn't state Josephine's pediatrician, and when asked how many of Josephine's first 14 months he'd been physically present for, he estimated most of them. A number Priscilla then set directly against phone records showing 4 total text messages and 0 documented visits. When it was my turn, I didn't raise my voice once. I walked to the stand using my cane, sat down, and answered every question plainly, letting Corinne's written summary, my invoices, Josephine's medical records, and Faye's statement do the work my composure didn't need to. The judge, a measured woman named Judge Marisol Foam, asked me directly at one point whether I believed my physical recovery had ever limited my ability to care for Josephine. I told her the truth. It had made everything harder, and I had done it anyway, every single day, without anyone's help but my own determination and the people who chose to show up. Judge Foam took 11 days to issue her written ruling, a timeline Priscilla told me was fairly typical for a contested custody matter with this much documentary evidence to review. The ruling was thorough, and in places, pointed. She found that Desmond's petition had relied heavily on characterizing my injury as an ongoing incapacity without presenting any current medical or observational evidence to support that claim, while I had presented 11 months of consistent, documented, independent caregiving alongside verified medical clearance of my functional mobility. She granted me primary physical custody of Josephine, awarded me sole possession of the family home given that I had maintained the mortgage independently throughout the separation period, and granted Desmond standard supervised visitation with a pathway to unsupervised visits contingent on demonstrated, consistent involvement over the following year. In her written findings, she noted specifically that a parent's temporary physical limitations following a medical crisis are not, on their own, evidence of unfitness, particularly when that parent demonstrably continued providing full-time care throughout the recovery period in question. 14 months after the accident and just over 1 year after Desmond packed those 2 suitcases. I walked out of that courthouse using only my cane, no walker, no crutch. Josephine's small hand wrapped around 2 of my fingers as she took her own slow, determined steps beside me across the parking lot. Corinne tells me my gait will likely keep improving for another year or so, and some days I still catch myself gripping a railing out of habit rather than necessity. Desmond has had 4 supervised visits since the ruling. Josephine doesn't yet ask where he's been, but I know that question is coming eventually, and I've decided I'll answer it honestly when it does, the same way I answered every question in that courtroom. Somebody scrolling right now has spent a year proving people wrong without a single person clapping for it. Comment still walking if that's you, and subscribe to Betrayal Chronicles so the next story finds you too.